So good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Leveraging Your Trade Association Membership with an Emphasis on Advocacy and Lobbying. I'm Anne Dermody, Content Marketing Managing Editor here at CQ Roll Call, and I'm joined today by Blake Major, who is the Manager of Federal Government Affairs at AIG. We're delighted to have Blake along. And we'll chat to Blake in a little while, but first I'm going to hand you over to the very able Joshua Habursky. Many of you will probably already be familiar with Josh from this webinar series. Josh is currently the Director of Advocacy at the Independent Community Bankers of America, and he's also the Chairman of the Grassroots Professional Network, who we're delighted to partner with for this webinar series. So without further ado, let's kick things off. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm excited to have a great topic here today on leveraging your trade association membership. Just to give you a bit of an overview of what we're going to discuss, the basics of what a trade association is, the history, how people can utilize them effectively for advocacy and lobbying, some tips and tools for success, and then, of course, some additional resources as follow-up on trade associations. So Blake and I are both very familiar with different trade associations. I currently work at a trade association for community banks, and Blake, obviously in the corporate side of things, utilizes a trade association for many resources and information. So the basics, what is a trade association? Trade associations are business associations, sector associations that are funded and supported by business in a specific industry. So, you know, the example in Blake's case would be the American Council of Life Insurers. That's one of the trade associations that AIG utilizes. In my case, we are supported by community banks across the country, 6,000 of them, and you know, we are a trade association that provides a lot of information, data, statistics, metrics, as well as advocacy and lobbying, which is a core function. So some of the other core functions besides lobbying and advocacy are public relations, advertising, basically showcasing the industry in a positive light. A lot of times this will focus on community impact. So, you know, for example, what are community banks doing throughout the country? How are they positively impacting, you know, their communities as well as society in general? So that might be anything from an infographic or something in a newspaper saying, you know, community banks lend X amount of dollars for homeowners to get their first home or finance their college education. Those are just a few examples there. Education, research, and publishing. Every trade association has a list of communications, whether it be email, social media, books, conference programs. They definitely emphasize proliferating the information about their industry. Some of those same things that I just mentioned in the public relations sense also apply with the industry. They want to keep everybody up to speed on what's going on in a certain sector, and they'll do so through a litany of publications. Then, of course, you have forums for social dialogue, networking within the industry, coming up with ideas in different conferences and conventions. You'll have some of these that are, you know, widely attended or sector-based on different issues or specific facets of a particular industry. And of course, you have the online webinar series where people are also briefed on some of this information. It's interesting, in our organization, we have Community Banker University, so there's a forum for training, professional development, as well as networking within most trade associations. Then, of course, in the lobbying and advocacy sense, you'll have your traditional lobbying, you'll have your grassroots and grass tops, which I work in, and then, of course, the PAC, so contributing to political action committees by the membership or the select class, and funding people that support the issues that the trade association works on.
Mm-hmm. So I imagine, Josh, that trade associations run the gauntlet of all sorts of sizes and, from the very large to the small.
Certainly, you have very small ones with, limited resources. I've talked on previous webinar series about the membership type of association, which is a little bit different than a trade association. Which, when I was working for the American Motorcyclist Association, we were a membership association, which had, more limited resources than a trade association that's sponsored by business or corporations within the industry. So there's an important distinction, often confused. There's a lot of similarities between the two, but a few of the examples of trade associations, of course, as I mentioned already, the Independent Community Bankers, American Council of Life Insurers, some of the bigger ones, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, American Society of Association Executives, and the American Medical Association. So the three that are listed below, those are some of the largest and the most active trade associations out there. The second one that I mentioned, being the American Society of Association Executives, is essentially an association for associations. So the fact that people like to joke that there's an association for everything, and it really is true. But the ASAE does great work along with the Chamber and the American Medical Association, and a lot of the smaller trade associations really look to them for new ideas, new technology, and basically how to be on the cutting edge of the association world. So some additional background information, there's approximately 7,600 national trade associations. You'll have state affiliates or independent state groups. But the national ones will obviously be larger in most cases. Of course, states like Texas and California, the state organizations or the independent state groups can get very large and have, an abundance of staff and, have a large presence in state capitals like Sacramento or, Austin. And I think that that's a real challenge sometimes, and we've talked in previous public forums, is how does the relationship between state affiliates work with a national organization? How are they cooperating and working with one another? That's a separate topic that we could have a whole webinar on, or a live lunch and learn. But it is one of the things that is important to note as a potential challenge of maintaining those relations, especially when you have 50 state organizations out there having to manage or at least communicate. A large number are based in Washington, D.C. Chicago is another large hub for healthcare trade associations specifically. So a lot of them will have a D.C. presence for the advocacy and lobbying wing, but Chicago and specifically in the suburbs, you'll have a lot of pharmaceutical companies around there. So obviously you'll have trade associations that are doing a lot of research and supporting the work of some of those companies as well. One of the oldest, if not the oldest, trade association is the American Seed Trade Association, and that was founded in 1883. A little bit of a historical note.
Definitely, yeah. Interesting to note that trade associations have been around 100+ years.
Yeah, I'm sure that there'll be some anniversary celebration coming up pretty soon for the existence of that. And I know that the Seed Trade Association still does a lot of great work. So in terms of advocacy and lobbying, which, we focus on a lot, what do trade associations really do? So a portion of membership dues go to non-deductible advocacy and lobbying. Trade associations will often attempt to influence policy on both the legislative and regulatory side. This is, information, direct lobbying, meeting with staff, influence public policy in a direction that supports the interest of their membership. This is where the term special interest comes from. Trade associations are a form of special interest. The core functions, donating to candidates or political parties through a political action committee. So it's collective action for political involvement. That's how I really view the role of trade associations in advocacy and lobbying. It's great to have a voice and come in and speak as, let's say, for instance, the Second Amendment. You're an avid gun owner and you want to talk about preserving the Second Amendment. It's great and all to meet with your member of Congress one-on-one and talk about the issue, but as the National Rifle Association and having that standard and the tools and resources behind you, you're able to have a lot of different meetings and put out information and public statements there. So, the NRA is one of those hybrid groups. They are a membership organization as well as a trade association, so they're supported by some corporate entities as well, a lot of times through different events and stuff like that. So there are hybrids, and I think that's where sometimes it becomes a little more confusing on the distinction between membership and trade association, because you do have some overlap. So advocacy and lobbying, how can you benefit as a member? As I mentioned before, research and statistics, presenting these in a compelling, creative way. Now we're in the short-form communication world. I think that, social media, those different posts like that, but not only that, but infographics like the one, both of these, the Realtors Association put that together on the bottom corner, and then at the top, the brewers, the beer Trade Association put that 2014 Small and Independent Craft Breweries. And just, processing that information, they calculated the statistics and they put out this piece. Sometimes pieces like this will appear in, Roll Call, Politico, The Hill, DC publications, but not only in the advertising sense, but this might be a leave behind that a grassroots advocate would give to a member of Congress or staff. Some potential advocacy assets are obviously the website, newsletter, and email blast, the different action alerts, magazines. We at the Community Bankers have the Independent Banker, which is a monthly magazine that we inform our membership on different things. We have actually a grassroots section on that, which, in our advocacy department we contribute to. Promotional materials, as I mentioned, infographics, white papers, stock language for grassroots action alerts. So sometimes, we're trying to maximize our reach and get an active presence in grassroots advocacy. So we'll provide information to the states that they can use, they can adapt, they can forward along and use through their systems, or sometimes we even lend a link to the state affiliates or other partners that they can utilize as a standalone that we track, and we get to see the metrics, but we share that information with them at the end. Forums for political discussion. A lot of trade associations have lobby days or fly-ins. Some are even doing virtual fly-ins. But now you're even seeing, since Congress is stagnant and not getting a lot of stuff done, you're seeing more and more people coming to D.C. to try to break the gridlock or potentially get a rider and some other legislation that could pass. Now, especially as we enter the lame duck period. So you might see more policy summits where not only do you have a lobby day, but you have a forum where people talk about the issues, set priorities, and really build the advocacy and lobbying strategic plan for the upcoming year. How are we going to approach these certain different issues and meet with lawmakers? Panels at general conferences. Most of the time you'll have a legislative or a regulatory update. You might have an advocacy training for people that are looking into getting involved and meeting with members of Congress or communicating with them online and offline. contacts, this is another major asset of trade associations, industry experts on a multitude of different issues. I mean, some trade associations have a policy expert for subtopics of things, and it could be even a specific piece of legislation where they have an industry expert that's on call for that. Speakers for different events. This is especially useful if you're a state affiliate. A lot of times you'll call the national office, your national trade association, and get a speaker for your conference or your state lobby day. Lawmakers, being in D.C. and having a presence alone is important, and a lot of times if there's an issue going on in the states, or even the locality, you can always call your trade association, say, hey, I'm having this issue. Can you help? Do you know some contacts of lawmakers that I can meet with and discuss this problem, and how can we solve it? So just sharing those contacts. And then, of course, peers. I mentioned a lot of the different networking forums and the possibilities for that. So having the ability to contact peers, a membership directory, some different trade associations will have forums or like closed types of social networking forums. So that's another important quality for a trade association. Some of the common pitfalls and challenges of advocacy and lobbying in the trade association sense: internal strife, competing for territory, having the multiple trade associations that cover different topics or specific things, and setting that agenda. So, I used the visual example of UPS, FedEx, and the post office. They're essentially competing over the same territory. Well, that is applicable in the trade association world as well. Who's going to control the agenda? Everybody's trying to utilize and leverage the trade association more than the other. And when you have multiple corporations, you'll have, jockeying for a competitive business advantage. So sometimes you'll see legislation and regulation that is involving trying to close out the market share for competitors or grow the market share for the corporation itself. So you might be working in tandem on some trade association issues, but at the same time you're lobbying and you're advocating for stuff that could adversely affect a competitive company that you're also a joint member of. So media attention, membership retention, the turf war, those all exist in the trade association world in a lot of cases. Then, of course, overlapping efforts, lack of coordination and lack of communication tend to be another common pitfall that you see in advocacy and lobbying, where, it's not everything synced, not everything is you can't have a meeting for everything or a phone call for every issue. So you'll see some communication, some action alerts go out that would be better served in the trade association world that end up going out via corporate, and everybody does it individually, and they don't get as much traction or action in their advocacy appeal. I think that is where I will turn it over to Blake. Blake definitely has a ton of experience in this realm as well, and he'll talk a little bit more about the education and the other information and other tools of how trade associations are effective, and some of the other challenges that trade associations present for other entities.
Okay, great, terrific. Thanks, Josh. Really interesting stuff on sort of how trade associations work, sometimes with and sometimes against each other, I guess, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Great, so welcome, Blake. I think we might have gotten your title wrong earlier, so apologies for that. Blake, you're the Associate Director for Federal Affairs at AIG, and I know you're going to talk about some great ways to leverage and use your trade association membership that we mightn't have thought about. So over to you, Blake.
All right, thanks, Ann. Let's talk about some ways that lobbyists and government affairs teams can leverage your membership with a trade association. The first way, I think, is through education. If you've ever worked in an association, you know all about the dreaded annual conference. As trade association staff, they can be the most stressful part of your year. I still have flashbacks of running through hotel conference room hallways trying to get a microphone to a room in time for a session or hearing the constant complaints about how cold those rooms are. But as an attendee, it's a whole different world. Attending these conferences and seminars are a great way to stay on top of the latest trends and developments in your industry and an even better opportunity to network. Many trade associations also offer conferences just for government affairs staff. These are must-attend events for you and your team, especially in an election year like this. These are also great opportunities to hear from experts about the shifting political landscape going forward, helping you to stay up to date on issues that affect your company or your organization. They can offer valuable advocacy and communications workshops and also include a good overview of the issues that matter most to your industry. Beyond that, you can often learn a lot about some of the products and tools that work best in advocacy. Also, if you have a big internal meeting coming up and want to include a brief on the political environment, you can invite someone from the association to come speak to your executives. I actually just did this last Friday. We have an annual symposium for some of the people who sell our products, and we invited a well-known lobbyist from a very large trade association here in D.C. to come talk to them about some of the new regulations that have affected the industry and how they're going to impact their businesses, as well as update them on some of the things industry is doing as a whole to address their concerns. A lot of associations also offer continuing education and certifications that you can use for professional development. So let's say you're in an industry that you think you want to stay in for your career. It never hurts to get some letters after your name. To me, one of the best resources from an association is the access to research and data that comes as a benefit of your membership. AIG is a member of the American Council of Life Insurers, ACLI, which offers policy research and publications that often come in handy when I'm writing, let's say, a memo or drafting talking points on an issue. And actually, when I first started at AIG, I wasn't as well versed on some of the issues that fell under me as I'd like to have been. One of the first things I did was to go to the ACLI website and read up on some of the more important issues facing the industry as a whole. Most of these associations will offer explainers, one-pagers, or white papers on issues that provide the industry perspective and oftentimes the industry position on the issues. This helped me feel a lot more confident on these issues when I'm going to the Hill or having even meetings internally. Additionally, the research and data compiled by the association can and should be used in your advocacy efforts from grassroots to direct lobbying. Next up is strength in numbers. Trade associations, by definition, represent a number of companies and organizations with similar objectives and positions on issues of importance to a specific industry. Working together with your association and its members will amplify your message to Congress or the administration and help get your position noticed. When there's an issue that could have a significant impact on your industry, teaming up, using all the resources available to you is your best option and will help your position resonate the most on the Hill and in the White House. Beyond amplifying your message, working through your trade can help you to target your message to the offices that matter most. Let's say your industry wants to come out in front of a tax-related issue before what could be or looks to be an active congressional agenda next year on tax reform. When you start setting up meetings with offices for members on, let's say, Ways and Means, you can send companies with a large presence in the member's district. AIG, for example, has large offices with thousands of employees in Houston and New York. This gives us some better leverage than, say, another company in those districts that represent those locations. And I don't think Josh would let me do one of his webinars without including a famous historical quote, so I'll just say this. Lincoln said it best, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." I can't tell you how many times I've gone to the Hill and heard from staffers that industry needs to be on the same page on an issue when it's presented to them. Trade associations give companies an opportunity to hash out differences behind closed doors to prevent a unified force. This is absolutely vital in getting the support you need in Congress and the administration. So coordinating on meetings with other companies through your association will help show that unified force and amplify your message to members and their staff. The next way to leverage your membership is working behind the scenes. Now, this is something that I like to call ninja advocacy, which is something that I've trademarked, by the way. As most of you know, some issues can be politically tricky. Your organization might not want to take a public position one way or another for a variety of reasons, and navigating those waters can be difficult for the government affairs teams, especially in an election year. You'll appreciate having a trade association represent your interests while you take more of a backseat approach. The association can be the public face while you're in the shadows working behind the scenes and building the narrative. Letting your trade association get out in front of an issue while you stay in the background might just be the best move for many reasons, and many times the trades are more than willing to take that role. On the flip side, there might be times where your company shouldn't necessarily be the public face of an issue for whatever reason. Maybe it would hurt the chances for a bill to pass if your company supported it, or it only makes sense for you to be involved in lobbying one side of the aisle as one party has distanced itself from your company. In some cases, working through your trade association can help build support for the legislation without your organization getting publicly involved, hurting the company or the bill's prospects. The next way is saving time and resources. A lot of companies are tightening their budgets, which can limit the scope of your government affairs team and its ability to focus on a number of issues the company might be confronting. You can work through your trade association's lobbying team, relying on them to advocate on issues that are important to you or your company, helping to save you money and resources. Also, most government affairs teams at trade associations will offer lobbying documents that your team can use, including handouts and talking points. For me, having access to summaries on legislation and hearings has been helpful on a number of occasions. Some days I just don't have the time or, frankly, the patience to sit and listen to a 4-hour hearing on pension reform, waiting for a member to bring up one small item or issue that's relevant to me. Most trade associations will send out summaries of these hearings that you can tailor and forward on to others on your team or executives in your company. There's also been a number of times where I'm watching a hearing and for whatever reason I'll miss something. Using these summaries to make sure you've captured everything in your memo can definitely come in handy. Also, sometimes I just don't have the time to read a bill or draft legislation the minute it's given to me. And knowing that you can read a summary from the association is a great way to check your initial interpretation of a provision or a proposal. Additionally, you can always call up the government affairs staff to discuss any issues or thoughts you might have on the bill. This has helped me a number of times to better understand the legislation and offer a position internally when sending it off to executives. The next way to leverage your membership is through connections. Many trade associations have built up solid connections on the Hill that you can and should use for your benefit. A lot of them hire former staffers, as most organizations in DC do. And leveraging these connections for your benefit can help you in a variety of ways. Recently, we had some executives express their interest in scheduling a district meeting with a committee chairman. Needless to say, this is a great opportunity for government affairs offices to prove their worth internally, and equally important, it's an opportunity to meet directly with a member, discuss an issue in their home district that's important to your company. It gets the executives involved in government relations, and for many of them, it gets them excited about how they can affect change in DC. But for whatever reason, we were having some trouble getting this meeting scheduled. After not hearing back from the district director, we went through someone at our trade association who, fortunately for us, used to work in that member's office. The meeting was scheduled immediately. When your trade association is hosting a briefing or reception on the Hill, it's also a great opportunity for you to get access to members of Congress and their staff, and of course, you can get some free drinks out of it. Building your network is an essential part of the job, so take these opportunities and go out and meet some people. Also, if offered, always jump at the chance to speak at a Hill briefing. It's a great opportunity to get out in front of staff and show how you and your organization could be an educational resource to them. And if you're lucky, you might get some free Chick-fil-A out of it.
Great, that's great, Blake. Thank you. Definitely some food for thought there on getting more from your trade association, and I've definitely got a mental visual on ninja advocacy. That might be your new Twitter hashtag or maybe a Halloween costume. So just to let everyone know that if you did sign up for our webinar, you'll be getting a link to the recording. But first, I just wanted to mention a couple of additional resources that you might want to check out too. Of course, we're going to mention our CQ Connectivity blog, which is a great free resource if I say so myself. We have lots of articles, webinars, white papers, and things on there for GR professionals. And if you haven't already signed up for the weekly newsletter, I'd encourage you to do that on the website. And then more specifically in relation to trade associations, Marketing Mentor have a great list of trade associations and trade shows. You might want to check that out. And last but not least, of course, there's the Grassroots Professional Network. Go on there and have a look at all the great free events and resources that those guys have there too. So that's about it, folks. Thanks again for joining us. We hope you learned something today. Watch out for the email with the recording, and have a great day, everyone.